Assalamu alaikum. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. There are approximately 19 nations across the Middle East with American military bases on their soil. That's nations, not bases. Multiple bases exist within many of those nations. By some estimates, there are 63 active bases. Each of them is a hegemonic wedge that, once established, is a thorny presence operating largely independently of the host state, and which, like a visitor that does not wish to ever leave, are nearly impossible to shake loose. The often threatening presence of American military bases across the Muslim world is not merely strategic. Sadly, it is symbolic of deep fragmentation across a splintered region, not only in terms of territory, but of political will, spiritual cohesion, historical consciousness, theological understanding, and also in terms of a citizenry cast aside by governments who prefer to manipulate them rather than serve and uplift them. So the modern Muslim state, even when entirely run and staffed by Muslims, is an imitative structure. They are mimic states shaped by the will of Western powers and by the divisions originally created with the cooperation of various Arab groups who sought ascendance in the time of Sykes-Picot. And through their cooperation in the imperial battles against the regional Middle East empires of that period, they achieved their ascendancy. Whatever their final form, family dynasty, military dictatorship, monarchies, presidential republics, federations of family emirates, parliamentary, parliamentary democracies, they are by and large Western in soul. And they manage religion as a subset of politics, tightly shaped by the restrictions and the manipulative interpretations prescribed by governmental authority. And a false narrative of impunity and near infallibility that is given to the monarchical leaders in the region. It's very difficult for an ummah to have any real substantial quiddity or reality in such a situation. And the fragmentation of the ummah in our era is, however, not solely due to American bases, which are only one symptom of broader issues, but because the ummah has, in a sense, been conceptually overshadowed almost wholly by the nation state itself. So contemporary American power functions as an enforcer to utilize powerful influence to maintain the current fractures or to shape future ones. But really the conceptual betrayal is internal, and such a breach is easily exploitable by others, by Israel, by the United States, by other Western nations. Now, if the Ummah is not merely the collective of those who superficially follow Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam historically and who interpret the Qur'an to suit their political structures, if it is a cosmological, metaphysical truth, this Ummah, then our modern negligence of it should really shake the very foundations of our being. If the Ummah of Muhammad is one that unfolds through striving towards becoming a community of those who seek to participate in the Muhammadan reality, the Haqiqa al-Muhammadiyah, then it must be a community that reflects the divine names and strives to shape itself in full receptivity to those qualities that are embodied by the Prophet and to attempt to realize them in the very difficult crucible of this world. Now, if the concept of Ummah is rooted in the Qur'an and in the Prophet's reality, as the Qur'an says, you, O Muhammad, are of a truly mighty disposition, a tremendous nature. That's Qur'an 68:4. And includes earlier prophets and the principled and virtuous throughout time, then unity is not simply political, but spiritual and ontological. Those who are inwardly aligned with truth, with al-haq, belong to this ummah, regardless of geography or historical period. And the Quran speaks of a primordial covenant in Quran 7:172, of truth between all human souls, a covenant whose reality is embedded deep in our nature, and of a similar covenant of consilience, of agreement between the prophets in Quran 3:81. And together, these covenants imply a community of souls that are bound to God and to his prophets across time and space, an ummah of hearts that have striven to connect themselves to guidance and truth amidst the turmoil and confusion of material existence. However, an ummah with feet of clay is in constant danger of collapse. An American base is not just in the soil, it's a manifestation of the rot eating away at Muslim psyches and corrupting their hearts. As long as the amoral security architecture of Washington and Israel is given more weight than the ethical risk of standing for justice against an ongoing genocide and against sectarian politics, the primary characteristic of the Ummah will be that of a hollow terracotta shell, devoid of the Mohammedan spirit, of the Quranic spirit, and of the essence of the human spirit, the primordial fitra. As the Quran says, truly this, your Ummah, is one Ummah, and I am your Lord and cherisher. That's Quran 21:92. Now, with the abdication, or rather the purposeful distortion and negligence of responsibility by some Arab states, the burden falls upon others, not only to build, but to repair the harm that has accumulated over decades. The builders of the Ummah may not necessarily be politicians or generals or monarchs. Rather, they are those who in every corner of the world, whether under surveillance or siege, stand up and say, we submit to God. But how do we submit? And what does that submission entail? The Ummah must, at its core, be a moral and spiritual community under God's sovereignty. As the Quran says, truly this your Ummah is one Ummah, and I am your Lord and cherisher. So turn the totality of yourself towards me. That's Quran 21:92. This should be understood not as a nice sentiment, but as a divine command. It is not solely a human accomplishment, but it's one supported by God for those who actually turn to Him. We make the effort, He provides its fulfillment, but we have to turn. So it begins not in redrawing borders, but in reordering souls. And in this perspective, the presence of a foreign military domination in the heartlands of Islam does not make the Ummah impossible. It makes its spiritual necessity crucial and essential through us. And if realized, an Ummah of this caliber will, by its very existence, make the presence of foreign military domination impossible. The authenticity of Islam is not preserved through forms alone, but through the heart and mind's fidelity to the transcendental orientation signified in revelation in the Quran and enacted by us, and the sense of being accountable to God and not to history, viewed as a series of events that just follow one another, or as a clash of civilizations and the termination of history itself. History is not closed. We are not at the end of history. Islam is not merely personal, and God's justice and mercy must be enacted by us in ethical balance, not just passively awaited. And this is an inherent element of our test in this world and our taking on of the trust bestowed upon humanity by God. We can't live by convenience and political expediency, but we must live, if we are true adherents of Islam and the Quran and of the Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we must live by metaphysical truth, not by geopolitics, compromise, capitulation, fearfulness, or cynicism. We must build communities capable of enduring difficulty, of enduring sanctions, isolation, and sacrifice without turning aside from the task that is at hand. And we must be able to do this for the sake of independence, dignity, and the noble ethics dwelling within our nature, and which wait to be manifested within the Ummah as a whole. Look, history under empire is, with some exceptions, a continuous catastrophe. It is a piling wreckage of what? Of colonization, of war, of genocidal slaughter, and purposeful forgetfulness or blindness, or worse, justification of inflicted disasters. The Quran points us to many powerful imperiums of past ages, of generals and monarchs of past ages, and their self-inflicted collapse as they became dominating unjust powers. Our task is not to be stuck in or to make peace with this kind of flow, but to interrupt it and negate it and lay principled foundations for building anew. There are Blessed Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam begin with a state? He began with people who were marginalized, mocked, killed, or exiled. He slowly forged them into an ummah that loved truth more than tribe, justice more than wealth, purity of heart and action more than material gain or social recognition, and God more than power and all that power enables. In time, the structure of emergent polity materialized, but it took quite a while. It manifested as an outgrowth of spiritual and ethical trust and a solid binding within a community struggling, however imperfectly, to express the qualities embodied in the divine names. In our own time, empire has disfigured the Muslim world so thoroughly that it sometimes seems that the Ummah can perhaps only be rebuilt as an act of active resistance, through patience, but not passive or lazy patience, through theological clarity, through attachment to the profound activism of the Qur'an itself, and sincere reliance upon God, and through transformation not just of thought, but of our very being, our pneuma, our quiddity, our metaphysical core. The Ummah's foundation was never just weapons, banners, or political force. Its foundation was always God and the truly sincere turning of hearts to Him. Assalamu alaikum, and thank you very much for your time.